There's a question sitting at the center of this whole case that nobody wants to say out loud, so let's just say it.
Do know that there is a conflict in the stories, and we are not stopping until we know what happened to Nolan Wells.
Nolan's mom is lying, Warren's lying, or Katie's lying.
See, I knew that the mother didn't just get the phone and went through it and realized stuff when was out of place. I knew it was more to it.
Was Christine Wansley coached? Because here's the thing. Either she made the decision to go on national television and deliberately mislead the public, which would absolutely destroy her credibility and honestly her legacy as a grieving mother fighting for her son. Or there are people operating in the background, people who have made careers out of showing up when Black families are at their most vulnerable, who convinced her to say things that fit a prepackaged narrative.
She said, and this is the part that bothers me, because I don't know if she intentionally did this in a malicious way, which will make me lose a tremendous amount of respect for her, or are these hood knuckle-dragging thugs who are siphoning money out the Black community, leveraging young brothers' deaths, convinced her to say this in order to push a narrative.
Both options are disturbing, and both deserve to be said clearly. Let's start with what we actually know. This wasn't just a slip of the tongue. This wasn't a grieving mother forgetting a minor detail under pressure. Judge Mathis, one of the very few public voices who has been rock solid behind Christine from day one, who has advocated loudly and consistently for Nolan Wells to get justice, came out and said it himself. She's been lying. He didn't soften it. He didn't dance around it. He pulled up the receipts and called her out directly, which tells you something, because this isn't someone who wants to see the case collapse. This is someone who genuinely cares about Nolan getting justice, and even he couldn't stay quiet about what Christine has been doing.
The forensic autopsy came back, and rather than clarifying the situation, the people around this case,
Ben Crump, the NAACP, others, seem far more focused on managing the optics than following where the facts actually lead. Nobody wants to get too far out ahead of the evidence. Understandable, to a point. But Christine apparently didn't get that memo, because according to what's been coming out, she's been doing the opposite, allegedly changing details, shifting her account of what happened. And some people are saying she may have gone as far as planting evidence, not filling in gaps, changing the story. Here's what makes this feel even more calculated. Word is that Christine is convinced Nolan's death is going to go unpunished, that the system isn't going to deliver. And from that fear, from that place of raw grief and distrust, she may have decided to manufacture what she couldn't find naturally. That's not justice. That's desperation dressed up as justice. And the difference matters enormously, especially in a case like this where every single detail is already under a microscope.
Now let's go back to where the cracks in her story first appeared, because this didn't start with some back-channel allegation.
It started on Good Morning America in front of millions of viewers. Christine sat down and talked about recovering Nolan's phone from his friend. She said Nolan was the type of person who documented everything, always had his camera rolling, always capturing moments. So she went into that phone fully expecting to find footage from the 4th of July, the day he vanished. But there was nothing there. His Snapchat had been completely wiped. No videos, no footage from that day. And on top of that, she said there were no text messages between Nolan and any of his friends from July 4th either, and those had apparently been deleted as well. So Christine's argument was clear. Someone went into that phone and scrubbed it clean, because whatever was on there would have told a very different story. That accusation pointed directly at Warren Hudson, one of the people who was actually on that boat with Nolan the day he disappeared.
The forensic autopsy came back, and lo and behold, even though they're trying to downplay it, and I understand Ben Crump and NAACP and others don't want to try and jump to conclusion or step too far out.
And Warren came out and shut it down completely. He said he never touched the phone, didn't know the password, had no reason to be anywhere near it. Flat denial, no wiggle room. Which means either Warren is lying through his teeth, or Christine's entire account of what was and wasn't on that phone doesn't hold up. One of them is not telling the truth. And right now, Judge Mathis isn't putting that weight on Warren. Right away, the stories didn't line up. One of Nolan's friends stepped up and backed the group's version of events, saying flat out that nobody had access to that phone from the moment it left the boat to the moment it got moved into the truck. Not a single person. So before anyone even had time to process what was happening, this case already had a serious credibility problem on both sides.
Christina was saying things got deleted off that phone. The friends were saying that was physically impossible because none of them even knew the password to get in. And honestly,
A lot of people listening to this sided with the friends. Think about that for a second. How many people actually hand their phone password over to their whole friend group? Not just one close friend, but the entire crew. Maybe one person in an emergency, sure. And even then, most people change it immediately after. But an entire group of friends all knowing your password? That's not how most people operate, and the public wasn't buying it. But the password situation wasn't even the most puzzling part of what Christina said. During that same Good Morning America interview, she went into detail about how she actually tracked Nolan's phone that night, and what came out of her mouth raised more questions than it answered. She said the location data from Snapchat and the location data from Life 360 didn't match up, not by a little. They were telling two completely different stories. She didn't give a specific number of miles or blocks in that interview, just described the two sources as inconsistent with each other. In her own words, the boys were pulling up the location from Snapchat, so the Snapchat location looks completely different than the Life 360 location. So when I pulled up Life 360, it was different. It was showing everywhere the phone had been. I was like, well, it's showing that he's back on land. He was like, but no, he didn't come back with us.
The boys were pulling up the location from Snapchat. So the Snapchat location looks completely different than the Life 360 location. So when I pulled up Life 360, it was different. It was showing everywhere the phone had been. I was like, well, it's showing that he's back on land. Like I'm not. He's like, but no, he didn't come back with us.
Now, two apps showing slightly different locations? That happens. Jeeps isn't perfect, and anyone with a smartphone knows that. But the gap Christina was describing sounded like more than just a minor signal delay, and one person wasn't willing to let that slide quietly. Nancy Grace jumped in, and when Nancy Grace publicly steps in to call something out, you know the stakes just got higher. She made it clear she could accept a discrepancy of a few blocks, maybe even a little more, but what Christina was describing was a whole different level of inconsistency. In Nancy's own words, I do know that there is a conflict in the stories, and we are not stopping until we know what happened to Nolan Wells. That hit different coming from someone who has spent decades dissecting criminal cases on national television. Nancy Grace doesn't show up to wave things off. She shows up when something genuinely doesn't add up, and a lot of people watching took that as a signal to pay closer attention. But here's what made this even messier. The location conflict wasn't the only thread people were pulling on. From day one, Christina had been very vocal about one specific thing that she said she simply could not wrap her head around. She said she couldn't understand why Nolan would ever choose to stay behind on that boat alone with a girl he had just met. Let that sink in. She wasn't just expressing confusion. She was implying, pretty directly, that the story his friends were telling, including the girl herself, a young woman named Katie, who said Nolan stayed back on the boat because he wanted to spend more time with her, was simply not true. Christina said they raised Nolan to always stay with the group, never split off, never leave your people. That was the standard in their household. So to her, the idea that he would voluntarily separate from everyone he came with to stay alone with someone he had barely known for a few hours, that didn't sound like her son. And if it didn't sound like him, then the question becomes, what actually happened in those final hours on that boat?
here's the thing that a lot of people glossed over when this story first broke. A judge named Ashley Cole, whose stepson Warren was actually on that boat, posted her own statement on Facebook.
And what she said directly contradicted Christine's version of events. According to Ashley, the boat left early because it was taking on water. Simple as that. But Warren didn't stop there. He came back later and got even more specific. He said it was actually the BGE pump that was acting up, and that Nolan made a conscious choice, his own decision, to stay back on the island with Katie while the group dealt with the situation. That's not an accident. That's not a miscommunication. That's a young man deciding to stay behind. Now Christine, Nolan's mother, is asking the public to trust her version based on one thing: the way she raised her son. She raised him to stay with the group, so therefore he must have stayed with the group. But here's the problem with that argument. The people who were physically there with Nolan that day, his own friends, and the girl he had just met, they are both on record saying he chose to stay. Those are eyewitnesses. That's not a theory. That's testimony. And here's where it gets uncomfortable, because this is the part that genuinely bothers a lot of people who've been following this story closely. Christine made a statement, and depending on how you read it, it either came from a place of grief and confusion or something much more calculated. The narrator is careful here not to point fingers without cause, but the question being raised is a serious one. Did she say what she said because she genuinely believed it? Or was she pushed into a narrative by people who had something to gain from spinning this story a certain direction? Because there's a pattern that keeps showing up in cases like this. People who exploit grief. People who show up with cameras and attorneys and social media strategies before the family even has time to breathe. People who are, in the words used here, siphoning money from the community while using young men's deaths as the vehicle. That's a brutal thing to say, but it's a question worth sitting with. Now here's where the press conference becomes the receipts. A clip starts circulating, and it's doing serious damage to Christine's credibility. During the presser, a reporter asks whether the attorneys have spoken to the other families involved, particularly after those families lawyered up. The response is a quiet, almost throwaway moment. No, they haven't spoken to the family. Read that back slowly. They have not spoken to the family. But the way Christine framed it publicly gave people a completely different impression. She implied that the other family had gone silent, that lawyering up was a sign of distance or even guilt, when in reality her own legal team was the side that hadn't made contact. The communication had stopped because Christine's side stopped it. That's a significant detail, and it got buried fast. Now enter Ashley Cole again. She's the stepmother of Warren, one of the boys who was on that boat. And she's a judge, yes, but a family law judge, not a criminal court judge. Some people were trying to frame her as someone with the power and the motive to interfere in the case. That framing doesn't hold up. A family law judge doesn't have jurisdiction over a criminal investigation. She doesn't have the leverage to move that needle, and presenting her that way was misleading. But what Ashley did do was reach out directly to Christine, and this is where it gets real. A private message, leaked and later verified, was sent from Ashley Cole to Nolan's mother. The date was July 7th. The message was short and direct. Christine, this is Ashley Cole. If or when you ever want to talk to me, this is my number.
That's it. No threats, no lawyers, no public pressure campaign.
Just a stepmother of one of the boys who was there that day, reaching out human to human, offering a line of communication. That message was sitting there waiting, and the public is left wondering whether Christine ever responded. And if not, why? Because if your goal is truth, if you genuinely want answers about what happened to your son, you pick up the phone when the stepmother of a witness calls you. That conversation could change everything. The fact that this message had to be leaked rather than acknowledged publicly says something. And right now, the people paying closest attention are starting to ask exactly what that something is. Here's something that gets overlooked in all the noise around this case. If you genuinely believe your son's friends had something to do with his death, the single most logical move you could make is pick up the phone and talk to their mothers. That's it. That's the play. And the thing is, that opportunity was sitting right there on the table. The boys didn't all lawyer up immediately. That's a myth that keeps getting repeated, and it needs to stop. Warren had legal representation before anyone else in the group. That part is true. But the other boys, they actually sat down and did something close to a polygraph-style interview with no attorneys present at all. No lawyers coaching their answers. No legal shield, just them answering questions. So when people say they all lawyered up and went quiet, that's simply not what the record shows. And even if every single one of them had lawyers from day one, the mom still said, "Come talk to me." That door was open. She extended the invitation herself. So what happened next? Nothing. She didn't respond. No call, no meeting. Then days later, she had to come back and issue a correction on something she'd said publicly. And now there's another correction worth noting here, because in a previous interview, it was mentioned that possibly none of the families had reached out. That's not accurate. 2 or 3 of them did make contact. One reached out simply to offer condolences. Another kept it simple, saying something like, "Hey, whenever you're ready to talk, just give me a call." Those aren't the actions of people trying to hide. Those are people trying to open a door. Then there's the expert opinion that cuts right through the speculation. A former FBI agent named Jennifer Kofender went on record and broke it down. She reviewed everything that was publicly available, the surveillance footage, the witness statements, the Coast Guard communications, and the riptide conditions in that area at that time. After going through all of it, her conclusion was clear. Everything she looked at pointed toward a tragic accident, not foul play. That's not a random opinion. That's a trained investigator reading the available evidence and telling you what it says. But then comes the moment that really shifts the ground under this whole story. When Nolan's body was found, Christine's own account started falling apart. She had said that the day after Nolan went missing, his father, Elmore Wansley, personally went out on a boat near Horn Island, actively searching the water for his son through the night. They didn't find him. But here's the problem with that. The very next day, Nolan was found in that same general area. So you have to ask yourself a real question here. If Elmore was out on that water searching all night and came back empty-handed, how did the body turn up right there the following morning? Either someone is lying, or Christine is suggesting law enforcement planted the body, and she hasn't said that. Someone's story doesn't hold up, and you can draw your own conclusion about whose. Now here's where things get even more layered. After watching the press conference that Nolan's parents held alongside attorney Ben Crump and Reverend Al Sharpton, more details started surfacing that change how you have to look at this entire situation. The parents revealed that they had personally visited the exact location where Nolan's body was eventually found, and they were there the day before the body was discovered. According to them, there was nothing there. No body. You heard that right. And then Nolan's father dropped something in that same press conference that directly contradicts Christine's earlier claim. He said he didn't even have access to a boat that night. He couldn't go out on the water to search for his son because he had no boat to take out. So how does Christine's version of events, where Elmore is actively on a boat searching Horn Island through the night, square with Elmore himself saying he had no boat? These two stories cannot both be true at the same time. One of them is wrong. And that's not a small discrepancy. That's a contradiction sitting at the center of everything this case is built around. The morning after the search began, one of Nolan's coaches picked up the phone and called his father. He told him he'd take the family out on a boat to Horn Island to look for Nolan themselves. They went out there. They combed through that island, and they found nothing. Here's what makes that even more unsettling. There were people who had actually stayed overnight on the island. So if Nolan had been stranded out there, he wasn't alone in the dark. There were people around, people he could have walked up to and asked for help. On top of that, 2 boats were docked right there. So even in the worst-case scenario, he had options. He had shelter. He had a way to signal for help. The idea that he just vanished without a trace while all of that was available, that's where the story starts to crack. They went out to Horn Island on the 5th searching for him. Then on the 6th, the phone rang with news nobody wanted to hear. His body had washed up on shore. But here's the part that's hard to sit with. His own parents had been standing on that island just the day before, 1 day apart. That kind of timing doesn't just sting, it raises questions.
So where does Judge Mathis fit into all of this? He's been one of the most vocal figures in this case from the jump.
Early on, he was firmly in the corner of Nolan's family, no hesitation. But from what's being said now, his position has shifted, at least somewhat. After getting a more detailed breakdown of the inconsistencies in the statements and the timeline, he's looking at this whole situation through a different lens. He's still pushing for Nolan. He hasn't walked away from that, but he's reportedly side-eyeing Christine a lot more than he used to. And Mathis hasn't been quiet about what he actually thinks happened. He said plainly that he believes Nolan was killed, not that he drowned, not that it was an accident, killed. He pointed directly to the results of the independent forensic autopsy, the one Christine commissioned herself because she believed Mississippi law enforcement was tampering with the official investigation. The findings from that autopsy caught his attention in a serious way. According to Mathis, the autopsy showed discoloration on the back of Nolan's head, what he described as bruising that looked consistent with someone pressing a hand against the back of his skull. That's not a small detail. That's the kind of detail that changes the entire conversation around how this young man died. And Mathis didn't stop there. He also called out the inconsistencies in what Nolan's friends have been saying, not just Christine's account, his friends' accounts too. He said there are too many moving parts, too many versions of events that don't line up cleanly. And he specifically pointed to marks found on Nolan's neck as something that demands a real explanation. Something happened on that island. That's his position, and he's sticking to it. He also raised a question that honestly a lot of people have been asking quietly. Why did Nolan's friends leave him on Horn Island without his phone? Think about that for a second. You leave someone on an island without their phone, without a way to reach anyone, without any way to call for help if something goes wrong. How does that happen? And why hasn't there been a clear, satisfying answer to that question yet? Now, here's the part where this gets even more complicated. Judge Mathis is known for being sharp, for being direct, for not sugarcoating things. People who follow his commentary know he'll crack a joke, but he doesn't traffic in lies. So when he starts flagging inconsistencies on multiple sides of this story, including Christine's side, that's worth paying attention to. Because if the allegations circulating right now are accurate, if Christine has been shaping or exaggerating parts of her narrative to pressure law enforcement into making an arrest, that strategy could backfire in a devastating way. Not just for her, but for Nolan. Every time a key detail gets questioned, Every time the story shifts, it gives the people who want this case buried another reason to look away. And the window for real accountability doesn't stay open forever. What's even more troubling is that the public is already starting to turn. It's not just critics or anonymous commenters. People who were genuinely invested in getting Nolan justice are now raising their eyebrows. Some are openly calling out Christine and her husband, saying they seem more focused on media appearances than on the actual investigation. That's a harsh accusation, but it's out there, and it's spreading. One person online put it bluntly, saying, "All these interviews and not one tear." Another pointed out that Christine and her husband were participating in a Q&A while an active investigation is ongoing. A Q&A, when your child's case is still open, when answers haven't been found, when justice hasn't been served. That strikes a lot of people as deeply strange, and it's fueling a narrative that's becoming harder and harder for the family to shake. None of this means Nolan doesn't deserve justice. He absolutely does. But the path to that justice gets narrower every time credibility takes a hit. And right now, credibility is taking hits from multiple directions. What's your take on all of this? So where do you stand on all of this? Christine's credibility is completely on trial right now, and the deeper this case goes, the harder it gets to ignore the inconsistencies stacking up against her story. People don't just misremember details at this scale. Either she's telling the truth, or she's been carefully constructing a version of events that protects her, and the evidence is starting to push hard in one direction. And then there's Nolan, sitting at the center of all of it, waiting to see if the system actually delivers for him. That's the question that keeps this whole story alive. Does justice even find the people it's supposed to find, or does it get buried under lawyers, delays, and convenient retellings? His outcome matters, and a lot of people are watching to see which way this falls. Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. Do you think Christine lied? Do you think Nolan walks away with the justice he deserves? This community always brings the sharpest takes, so let's hear it. And if you want more deep dives into the stories that hip-hop headlines barely scratch the surface of, hit subscribe and stay locked in with us. There's a lot more coming, and you don't want to miss it. See you in the next one.